She said divorce won't hurt her. So why did the entire courtroom gasp when the judge froze her money? That's what really happened. And if you're curious how we got there, listen closely. But first, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and drop a comment if you've ever seen arrogance crumble in front of everyone. It all started in the most ordinary way, around a dining table in a cozy suburban home. We were at a weekend dinner, the kind where neighbors, old friends, and extended family gather. The soft light from the chandelier spilled across polished wine glasses, the kind of glow that made everything seem warmer than it really was. The chatter was cheerful, the kind of forced laughter people exchange when they don't want to admit tension is hanging in the air. At the center of it sat my wife, Emily. She had her back straight, her smile wide, her voice carrying over everyone else's. She was dressed as if this dinner was her stage. Emerald green dress, hair pinned with just enough precision to look effortless, and the kind of smirk that told everyone she thought she owned the room. I sat quietly at her side, hands folded in my lap, the taste of steak dull in my mouth. I wasn't really eating. I was watching, listening. The clink of forks and knives made a rhythm under her words. Emily leaned in, her voice dropping just enough to hook the table's attention. "You know, I've been thinking," she said, eyes darting toward her friends across the table. "If David and I ever divorced." She let the words hang there like smoke. Then she smirked, tilted her glass, and added, "It wouldn't hurt me one bit. Nothing would change. Not a single thing." The table laughed. Too loud, too quick, like they'd been waiting for the punchline. Even her best friend, Claire, threw her head back, shaking with laughter. And Emily basked in it, her gaze flicking toward me, daring me to react. I stayed still, my jaw tight, my chest steady, my face unreadable. Inside, though, something twisted. It wasn't anger, not really. It was colder than that, like hearing the rattle of a snake in tall grass. You don't stomp, you don't shout, you don't run. You wait. The laughter stretched on. Forks paused midair, wine glasses raised like props in some cruel play. Emily turned her head just slightly, making sure I was watching as she whispered to Claire, "David's too soft. He could never handle me leaving." More laughter, more smirks, eyes glancing at me, measuring whether I'd snap, whether I'd protest. But I didn't. I lowered my eyes to my plate, cut another piece of steak I didn't taste, and let the sound of their amusement wash over me. I sat in silence, stone still, while Emily's words echoed louder than any joke could. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in them, not in her. In me. The house looked like a perfect postcard that Sunday afternoon, but inside it felt more like a stage where every smile had lines rehearsed. Emily had a way of turning the simplest gathering into her own theater. The clatter of plates, the faint smell of roasted chicken drifting from the kitchen, the sound of children's laughter from the backyard. It should have been a portrait of peace. Instead, it felt like a performance where I was cast as the silent prop. The conversation swirled around me, neighbors catching up on vacations, friends trading stories about promotions, Claire filling the room with her animated hand gestures as she spoke. And then there was Emily, her laughter high and sharp, the kind of laugh that made people turn their heads. She touched my arm once, not with tenderness but like a conductor tapping a baton, to remind everyone that I was there, her supporting actor. When the talk circled back to marriage, as it always seems to when couples gather, Emily leaned back with her glass of wine and said it again. "Divorce wouldn't hurt me. David's too nice, too predictable. If he left tomorrow, my life wouldn't skip a beat." She said it casually, but her eyes searched the table for reaction, for approval, for laughter. And of course, they gave it to her. Claire nearly spilled her drink from laughing so hard. And Mark, her husband, gave me that look of pity men give when they think you've lost control of your home. I just sat there, chewing slowly, my fork and knife making a soft scrape against porcelain. I didn't argue, didn't rise to the bait. The silence was my answer. It stretched across the table until even the laughter started to sound forced. People shifted in their chairs, uncertain whether to keep laughing or to let the moment die. Emily noticed, and she smirked, leaning closer to Claire, whispering something that I could still hear. "He'll never do anything. He doesn't have it in him. The words stung in the air, not because they surprised me, but because of how easily they rolled off her tongue, as if she had rehearsed them. My chest tightened, but I forced my breath steady. I took a sip of water, the glass cool in my hand, and studied the lines of wood grain on the table as though they held more meaning than her words. The night wound on, but the tension clung to me like smoke. After the guests left and the laughter faded into the night, Emily moved through the house with the casual arrogance of someone who believed she had won something. She hummed as she loaded dishes into the sink, her back to me, her movements unbothered. "You're too quiet, David," she said, not even looking at me. "You make it too easy." She shut the dishwasher, wiped her hands, and walked past me without another glance, her perfume trailing in the air like a dare. I sat there, the quiet wrapping itself around me, my thoughts sharper than the silence. Her words weren't just a jab in front of friends. They were a declaration, a performance meant to paint me as weak, to show everyone that she held the reins. But I didn't move, didn't argue. I let her think she had scripted the story. What she didn't see was the way I listened, the way I watched, the way I absorbed every smirk, every whisper, every smug laugh. She believed she had control, but all she had really done was reveal herself. And in that quiet, something colder and heavier than anger settled into me. It wasn't about shouting, it wasn't about proving her wrong at the dinner table. It was about patience, about timing, about letting her believe in her own untouchable stage long enough that when the curtain finally fell, the silence afterward would be louder than any applause she had ever received. That night I lay in bed beside her, the sound of her steady breathing filling the darkness, while my eyes traced the ceiling above. My hands were still, but my mind wasn't. The words she had spoken replayed again and again, not as wounds but as fuel. "Divorce won't hurt me," she had said. "Nothing will change." She believed it so deeply that she flaunted it like a crown in front of her friends. And as she slept, unaware of the weight of her own arrogance, I realized something that made my chest calm and my pulse steady. She thought silence was weakness. She had no idea what silence could become. The weeks that followed seemed ordinary on the surface, yet every detail felt sharpened, as if the world itself was leaning in closer. Emily carried herself with the same radiant confidence, striding into rooms as though applause should follow. She filled her days with lunch outings, late-night texts she thought I didn't notice, whispers over the phone that ended the moment I walked in. If she caught my eye lingering, she smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that hid daggers. People always talk about betrayal as a single moment, like one sharp stab, but the truth is more subtle. It's slow, like water dripping against stone, each drop carving a groove you can't see until it's too deep to ignore. Every late arrival, every secretive laugh into her phone, every dismissive glance across the dinner table added to that groove. And while she thought I was blind, while she convinced herself I was too passive to notice, I was listening with the patience of someone who already knew the ending of a play. One evening, I found her phone face down on the counter, buzzing twice before going still. She was in the shower, her voice carrying faintly in a melody she hummed without care. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The way she rushed to pick it up later, the way she tilted the screen away from me even though I hadn't moved from my chair, told me everything. I sipped my coffee and let the silence stretch. She glanced at me, waiting for some question, some accusation. None came. That unsettled her more than any raised voice could have. Her behavior grew bolder with every day. At a neighborhood barbecue, she laughed a little too loudly at another man's jokes, her hand resting too long on his arm. People noticed. They didn't say it, but I caught the way their eyes flicked toward me, measuring my reaction. I gave them nothing. My smile remained calm, my posture steady. But inside, every gesture, every word, every careless laugh was another note I filed away. Patience had become my greatest weapon, and she couldn't recognize it because she had never practiced it herself. I remember one night in particular, when she returned home well past midnight. The sound of her heels on the hardwood was sharp, echoing through the quiet house. She tossed her purse onto the sofa, poured herself a glass of wine, and walked past me with that same air of untouchable superiority. "Don't wait up next time," she said with a smirk, as though her defiance was something to flaunt. I looked up from my chair, met her eyes, and simply nodded. That was all. No anger, no questions. Just a quiet acknowledgement that spoke louder than rage. She didn't realize then that her own arrogance was laying the groundwork for what was to come. Every careless display, every whispered call, every insult disguised as a joke was weaving the rope she would eventually trip over. And all I had to do was wait. Friends began to sense the shift, though they couldn't name it. At dinners, they grew quieter when Emily made her jokes at my expense. The laughter didn't come as easily. The smirks faltered. Something in my silence unsettled them, though they couldn't explain why. People expect a man to fight back, to argue, to defend himself with noise. They don't know how to read a man who chooses silence instead. Emily, though, doubled down. She leaned into her role, flaunting her imagined control, convinced that every jab made me smaller. She never noticed that her stage was starting to crack, that the audience was no longer laughing the way they once did. She was too blinded by her own reflection to see it. At night, when she fell asleep beside me, her breathing steady and unaware, I would lie awake with the kind of calm that comes only when you've stopped asking questions. I didn't wonder anymore if she would change. I didn't hope for some miracle of reconciliation. That part of me was gone. All that remained was clarity, and clarity is colder than anger, sharper than despair. One night, as the house lay silent, I rose from bed and walked into the study. The documents I had quietly collected over weeks lay neatly stacked inside a folder. Texts, photographs, little details she thought no one had seen. It wasn't anger that guided me as I placed them in order. It was precision, the kind of precision that comes from knowing there is no rush. I returned the folder to its drawer, closed it softly, and went back to bed without disturbing her. She stirred slightly, shifting beneath the covers, then settled again into peaceful sleep. I watched her for a moment, her face calm in the dim light, the face of someone who believed herself untouchable. My chest rose with a steady breath. She thought silence was weakness, but silence, I realized, was the strongest weapon I had ever held. And soon she would learn that too. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sky so gray it seemed to press down on the world. I dressed carefully, not with extravagance, but with precision. A dark suit, polished shoes, a tie knotted neatly. There was no tremor in my hands, no rush in my breath. Emily, on the other hand, glided around the bedroom with the same arrogance she carried into every gathering. She wore a tailored dress, heels clicking confidently against the floor, her perfume thick in the air. She didn't look at me as she fastened her earrings. Instead, she muttered, almost to herself but loud enough for me to hear, "This will be quick. Nothing will change for me." Her tone carried that same edge of superiority she had displayed at dinners, parties, barbecues. To her, this was just another stage, another audience waiting to applaud. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, its halls echoing with footsteps and hushed conversations. People sat on benches, eyes darting toward the doors of the courtroom, each of them with their own story, their own battle. Emily walked ahead of me, chin lifted, her stride full of certainty. She might as well have been walking into a gala. Friends of hers had gathered near the back, offering supportive smiles, whispers of reassurance. She greeted them with that radiant smile of hers, as if she were the star of the show. I simply nodded at a few familiar faces and took my seat, my folder resting on the table before me. The judge entered, and the room shifted to silence. Papers rustled, chairs scraped slightly as everyone settled. The proceedings began with the standard questions, the dry recitations of dates and filings. Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, glancing at me with a smirk. Her attorney spoke confidently, painting her as composed, responsible, untouched by the idea of divorce. She even whispered something to Claire, who had come to watch, and they both smiled, certain of victory before the real battle had even begun. When it was my turn, I did not speak loudly. My voice was even measured, deliberate, I handed the judge the folder, its weight heavier in meaning than in mass. Inside were photographs, messages, records she thought would never surface. The judge's brow furrowed as he read, flipping pages with a growing sternness. Emily shifted in her seat, her smile faltering just slightly. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering, but the whispers grew sharper as each page turned. Then came the moment. The judge's voice cut through the silence with a tone that left no room for doubt. He declared that, due to the evidence presented, all of Emily's personal accounts were to be frozen until the division of assets was complete. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The courtroom went silent. No one moved. No one breathed. I looked at Emily. The smirk was gone. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted in disbelief. Her eyes darted toward the judge, then to me, then back again, as though searching for some escape, some lifeline. But there was none. For the first time in all the months of her taunts, she looked small. Not powerful, not untouchable. Small. Her friends in the gallery sat frozen, their earlier smiles erased. Claire, who had laughed the loudest at those dinner parties, now sat stiff, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. No one dared to speak. The silence was deafening, more cutting than any shout could have been. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply sat with the calm that had carried me this far. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her water, her composure shattered. She tried to whisper to her attorney, but the words stumbled out, broken and uneven. The same woman who once declared that divorce would not hurt her now sat in a courtroom stripped of her certainty, her voice small and fragile. The session continued, but the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Where once Emily had commanded attention with her confidence, now every eye seemed to linger on her downfall. The judge's gavel eventually struck, closing the hearing, but the echo of his decision lingered in the air. As people filed out, the whispers began. Not laughter this time, not amusement, but quiet murmurs heavy with disbelief. Emily rose slowly, her movements stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. She no longer walked ahead of me, no longer carried herself with that radiant glow. She simply moved, one step at a time, her heels clicking softly now, stripped of their former arrogance. I followed behind, steady, silent, the weight of the moment settling into me. This was not triumph in the loud, dramatic way she had expected life to unfold. It was something colder, quieter, more final. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The gray clouds had begun to break, letting slivers of sunlight through. I paused for a moment on the steps, watching people disperse, hearing their murmurs fade into the hum of traffic. Emily stood off to the side, speaking hurriedly with Claire, her face pale, her gestures sharp. But there was no smirk, no laughter. I turned away, my steps steady, my breath calm. And in that moment, I realized something that will never leave me. Silence can be the loudest weapon of all. She had thought divorce would not hurt her, that nothing would change. But the truth was written on her face, carved into the silence of the courtroom, etched into the stillness that followed the judge's ruling. And as I walked away, I knew she finally understood what I had known all along. Sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding the sharpest blade. If you felt that moment as deeply as I did, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here.